Saturday, February 8th, 2020, Maneco 64, home of alternative economics and contrarian views. Today I want to talk about the petrodollar. I've made quite a few videos in the past about the petrodollar. One of them is probably one of my best videos in terms of views. It was made on March 17th, 2018. And it was entitled, What March 26, 2018 Will Mean to the Petrodollar. I'm going to put it up in the cards above in the description. And why March 26? Well, that was the date when the Shanghai Oil Exchange opened in China with an oil contract denominated in Chinese yuan. Yeah. If you want to know a little more about the petrodollar and the history, listen to that video. Today, though, I want to talk about how even America's allies are diversifying away from the petrodollar. They're trying to decrease their dependence on the petrodollar, the US dollar. Not just countries like China or Russia or other emerging market countries. We've got countries like the UK and the ECB for the Eurozone as well. And there's a couple of articles that I've seen. Well, one of them is recent. The other one is actually from August last year, but they're all kind of related. It doesn't mean that the dollar is going to go away just because of that. Think a little bit of the British pound. British pound is still one of the major reserve currencies, not the biggest reserve currency. Yes, up until World War I, it was the reserve currency of the world. So it doesn't mean the dollar is going to go away. It doesn't even mean that the dollar will not be the top reserve currency for many years. It just means that people are diversifying away from it. I think foreign reserves in dollars make up about 2/3 of all reserves, maybe a little less, 62. I think all this means is that that proportion, that percentage is going to drop towards 50, maybe less, who knows. And of course, it's difficult to say how quickly that will happen, but the effects of that, especially for Americans, for people who use dollars for day-to-day transaction, I think will be a continuing decrease in the purchasing power of the petrodollar. And why is that? Well, because there's going to be less demand for the petrodollar from abroad. And that has been one of the reasons the dollar or the petrodollar has retained its relative value for so long, because there's a lot of demand not just for buying oil, but for conducting trade between different countries that are not the US conducting trade amongst themselves. They use the dollar, but I think this is, of course, changing now. So let's look at these articles. The first one, let's go to the older one. It makes more sense. This is from Reuters, and it's from August 23rd, 2019. Headline says, world needs to end risky reliance on US dollar, BOE's Carney. I remember that. You might remember that. He made a speech at the Kansas City Fed's Jackson Hole Symposium. They hold that symposium every year. It's just a clam bake for central bankers at your expense, taxpayer expense. Why do I say that? Well, because the money the credit they issue out of thin air is backed by the debt that you have to carry, basically. Anyway, that's a different story. Let's go through the short article. So Reuters says, Bank of England Governor Mark Carney took aim at the US dollar's destabilizing role in the world economy on Friday and said central banks might need to join together to create their own replacement reserve currency. Before I go further, one of the reasons China is trying to diversify away from the petrodollar, to try to create mechanisms and exchanges in the case of the Shanghai Oil Exchange, is because during the '08 crisis, one of the reasons the US government had to bail out Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is that the Chinese had a lot of holdings of those securities. So the Chinese know that there is a danger, that the system is fragile, and that's why they're doing that. And I think other countries now, even allies like the UK, Western Europe, are starting to realize that, and they're trying to find alternatives. Personally, I would recommend that they all go back on a sound money system, on a gold standard. Of course, they probably won't do that. But be as it may, it's still going to affect the dollar. And yes, the dollar, for example, yesterday traded quite strongly against the major currencies. But that's day-to-day noise. We're looking here at the bigger picture. I'm looking here 5-10 years from now, how it will affect the purchasing power of the dollar. So let's continue. The dollar's dominance of the global financial system increased the risks of a liquidity trap of ultra low interest rates and weak growth, Carney told the central bankers from around the world gathered in Jackson Hole, Wyoming in the United States. And this is a quote from Carney. While the world economy is being reordered, the US dollar remains as important as when Bretton Woods collapsed, Carney said, referring to the end of the dollar's peg to gold in the early 1970s. Emerging economies had increased their share of global activity to 60% from around 45% before the financial crisis a decade ago, Carney said. But the dollar was still used for at least half of international trade invoices, 5 times more than the United States' share of world goods imports, fueling demand for U.S. assets and exposing many countries to damaging spillovers from swings in the U.S. economy. The other thing I would note, and I have said that many times in the past, is that yes, it's a privilege or an exorbitant privilege to be able to have the major reserve currency, but at the same time, it's a disadvantage, in my opinion, because it means that the US is always having to issue more and more debt because there's demand for it. The other thing it does, it doesn't help the domestic US economy because other countries around the world are trying to earn dollars. So they try to compete a lot with the US economy through producing cheaper goods, trying to sell it to Americans. So I actually think it's a blessing in disguise that the world tries to diversify away from the petrodollar, and I think it will be a good thing in the long term for the US economy. Carney, who was considered a candidate to be the next head of the International Monetary Funds but failed to secure backing from Europe's governments, said the problems in financial system were encouraging protectionist and populist policies. Earlier on Friday, U.S. President Donald Trump said he was ordering U.S. companies to look at ways to close their operations in China, the latest escalation of mounting trade tensions between Washington and Beijing. So there you go. That's the other problem with the reserve currency being the dollar. Countries like China, countries that are developing very fast, they need to increase their exports to earn the dollars. So I think it's a win-win in the long term for countries to have different options other than the dollar, not only for them, but for the US itself. Carney warned that very low equilibrium interest rates had in the past coincided with wars, financial crisis, and abrupt changes in the banking system. Is he warning about a reset there? Who knows? As a first step to reorder the world's financial system, countries could triple the resources of the IMF to 3 trillion as a better alternative to countries protecting themselves by racking up enormous piles of dollar-denominated debt. I would say that IMF fiat currency is just as bad, but let's continue. While such concerted efforts can improve the functioning of the current system, ultimately a multipolar global economy requires a new international monetary and financial system to realize its full potential, Carney said. China's yuan represented the most likely candidate to become a reserve currency to match the dollar. I don't disagree, because China's and the United States are the two biggest economies, so it makes sense that they have the reserve currencies. But it still has a long way to go before it was ready. That's the Chinese currency. The best solution would be a diversified multipolar financial system, something that could be provided by technology, Carney said. So I'm going to stop at this. And with the mention of technology, I'll jump forward to the article from more recently, from January 21st, 2020. And this is from coindesk.com. And it says, 6 central banks form digital currency use case working group. So let's have a look at this. So the article says 6 central banks have formed a working group with the Bank for International Settlements to share findings as each investigates potential cases for central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs. So even though the US or the Federal Reserve is a member of the BIS, Jay Powell goes there every 2 months for a nice dinner with his buddies. The US is not involved in this project at the BIS. So let's look at the article. It says the group will be comprised of the central banks of Sweden, US ally, Canada, Switzerland, the UK, and Japan, as well as the European Central Bank, ECB, and the BIS. So there you go. Even the closest of US allies, they're preparing to diversify away from the petrodollar. Announced by all 7 members Tuesday, each institution will continue assessing the economic, functional, and technical design choices, including cross-border interoperability of CBDCs, and will share any findings. So I'll just stop here for a moment. Am I saying they're going to have a gold-backed digital currency or a crypto digital currency? No, this is not what I'm looking at here. What I'm looking at is the diversification away from the petrodollar. We would hope that they would go more into gold, but you never know with these central bankers. They might think that they can continue this fiat game for longer. The members will also work closely with the Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures, CPMI, an international standard setter for payments and clearing, and the Financial Stability Board. That's part of the BIS. They say it's a recommendations body for the global financial system. Well, it's part of the BIS. It regulates the too big to fail, which has previously warned about the potential risks associated with stable coins. The other thing I would say that is very important if you're going to go away from the dollar is that you do need alternative payment systems and clearing systems to get away from the SWIFT system as well. So that's very important as well, and it shows that these guys are fairly serious. The working group will be co-chaired by the newly appointed head of BIS Innovation Hub, Benoit Cœuré, and John Cunliffe, the Bank of England's Deputy Governor and CPMI Chair. Senior representatives of other bank members will also be included. Cœuré took over as head of the Innovation Hub in part to lead BIS's effort in exploring central bank currencies. He previously told reporters in November the ECB was evaluating the future role of CBDCs when he had been a member of the bank's executive board. He has also chaired a G7 working group investigating the global impact of stable coins. I'm not going to go further into the cryptos and the stable coins here, and I'm going to stop at that. The article is a little longer. I'm going to put both articles, both links below in the description if you want to read them. But the main point I wanted to make, my conclusion from reading these two articles, is that not only are China, Russia, and some of their allied countries looking to diversify away from the petrodollar, but so are the United States' closest allies, like the UK, like Sweden, like Canada, Switzerland, and the European Union countries. So all that means is that going forward, the dollar will lose its share of global reserves. That's all it means. It will still be probably, if not the major currency, one of the major currencies for many years to come. But all that means for Americans and for people who hold dollars is that over the long term, those dollars are going to lose their purchasing power. Much like the British pound, one British pound used to buy almost $5 before World War II, $4.87 to be exact. And where are we now? $1.30. So it's been a steady decline in the purchasing power of the pound. And I think it's going to be the same thing for the dollar, not only versus the other fiat currencies, but versus precious metals. And also the other fiat currencies, they're going to decline versus precious metals. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, think about subscribing. Share the video far and wide as well. And you can also follow me on Twitter and Facebook, DTube, BitChute, and Steemit. I wish you all a great rest of the day. Take care. Bye.